in this video, I'd like to talk about functions quite briefly. So let's just look at how you define a function. So to define a function, you need to use the def keyword, def. It'll write myfunc, for example, and then you need the parentheses, and then you add the colon, and then you can just say print hello world, right? So if I run this, what do you expect should happen? So let's run it. So nothing happens, which is expected, right? Because we haven't called the function yet. And this is the typical thing that you forget when you just learn how to program. You forget to actually use the function, right? So a function, what we do here is we just define the function, we declare it, we say that this is now a function, and then it can be used in the program. So now I'm actually calling the function by using the parentheses. So let's run that. And now we see that I printed out hello world. Another thing that is really good with functions, or is kind of critical to understand what a function actually is that, so a function, I usually think of it as a parameter, right? So I actually think of it as a machine, I would say. It's a good analogy. So let's say you have a machine and you can insert something into the machine, and then it will spit out something as a result, right? So you can say to it, hey, I want you to convert this into something else, and then it will return something new, right? So let's say you pass it a string and it will return an integer, or you pass it an integer and it will return a string, right? So it does something and it returns a new result back to you. So the first thing we need to understand is how do we actually add something to the function. So that's what you call as parameters or arguments. And there's a even though people use the terms interchangeably, they are fundamentally different in the sense that, or I would say that they could be used to mean the same thing. So you could say parameter or argument, I mean one thing. But you could also, if you think about the function, then you would say that the parameter is the variable that is available to you in the function. So to prove this, to just show you how you could insert something into the function, you would then pass something here, right? So instead of outputting this string, I will instead say, hey, this is now a message, right? And I'll say it has the type of string. This is a type hint in Python. So you can say that even though Python doesn't support types in that sense that it is a strictly typed language, it's not. It does support types, but it's not a strictly typed language. So you could say that, hey, this should be a string. So if I pass it a 1, it should not like that. I don't think my IDE supports this right now, but yeah, you should get some type of error now, at least. But the point here is that, so it should be a string. It's kind of a hint, right? It doesn't strictly say, hey, this is wrong, but it is a hint. And then of course I have to use this parameter, right? So this is what I would say a parameter. I use this parameter inside of the function, but I passed it an argument. That's how some people use the argument and parameter thing. And some people say that the argument is the value and the parameter is the variable. That's a different. So you could say that the argument here is a type of type string, right? Whereas the parameter is the actual variable, or the reference to the value. So that's good to know. These are just semantics. Doesn't mean much, but right now what's important to understand is that a function can take an input. That's basically what it can do. So it takes an input and it can do something with that input, right? So you can pass it multiple things, which makes functions reusable, right? So you can say, hey, it could be different things that you pass to it, and it will perform the same computations with those different inputs and return different results, perhaps. So let's look at, and of course you could pass it multiple things. So you could say hello world, and you can pass it something else like a number 15, and then you would take that as well here. So you would say like age or something, I don't know, a number would be number, which is an int, right? And then you would say print number, and then this should now print hello world and then 15, right? So let's run that to see that it works. Yes, so hello world and then 15. And so in Python, when you talk about arguments, it is a bit special, right? So it does allow things that you wouldn't normally see in other programming languages. So you could kind of say, you could kind of pass it, if you don't explicitly say what this parameter is used for, then it has to follow the order, right? There's an order, so you can't say 15 and hello world. You can't say 15 first, comma hello world, and then expect this to be this, right? So the order has to follow, right? So this will correspond to this string, and this will correspond to this, right? They follow an order. But you could also run it like this. You could say, so you could say that the number should be 50, and I will say hi there, right? But then I also have to say message, right? So message. So this is called a positional argument, and it's a bit different. And now the order doesn't matter anymore, because now you're basically telling the Python interpreter or compiler that this is actually the number and this is the message. So then it doesn't need the order anymore, right? So you see that now it still prints hi there first, because it still understands that this is actually equivalent to what you get here as an input, and this is the number. So it still prints out them correctly, right? And there is one thing called kwargs. Okay, so this basically means that if you don't know the number of arguments that you will pass to a function, you can just define, say hello my def hello, I'll just call it hello, right? And I will just pass it, you see this star sign and args, the asterisk, and then I can say for item in args print item. And now if I use hello and I say hello, hi, 1, 2, 5, true, none, and I'll just print everything, I should get all of these now. So I say hi, 125, true, none. So it's kind of, it takes how many, it takes an undefined number of arguments, right? And kwargs is also interesting, because that kwargs, when I say kwargs, I mean kwargs like this. So that is so yeah. So one thing I forgot to mention was that, of course, you can also say that a function can have a default argument, right? So you can say that the number could be 5. You know, so if I don't pass it anything, so let's say I just say hello world and nothing else, then it should print 5. So let's run this. Now I'm printing quite a lot of things, but you should just focus on this. So I say hello world, and then it still prints 5, right? Even though, maybe I should clean this up a bit. So let's just clean up everything so we don't make things unclear now. So I defined a function, myfunc. It takes a message and it takes a number, but it also sets a default. It defines a default argument. So it says that, hey, this can actually be 5. If you don't provide anything, it will default to 5. So it's a default argument. So if I provide something like 10, like, okay, 4, then it will print 4, right? If I run this, just to prove it, it prints out 4. But if I don't define anything, I just define one argument, which is the message, then it will print out 5 by default. So this is good to know that you can also use these default arguments. Okay, so just make it clear. So what I mentioned before when I said that you could run this as number 4 and then message hello world. So this is what is called a kwarg, which also means kwarg. That's a keyword argument. So that just is good to understand. I got quite confused myself when I just read that there was something called kwargs, but it's good to know that it's a keyword argument and it works like this. So it's a key and value, right? So key and value. The second thing that is quite important to understand in this context is that, so as I said, a function can take, let's just define this again. So my func, it takes a message, right, a string, and it prints out the message, right? That's what I said. This is the old example. Just call this with hello world. So what I said was that a function is kind of like a machine. It takes something as an input and it returns something as an output. So there is an output that you can get from a function, and you can then do things with that output, right? So usually what you see quite often is that you see the typical sum function. So it sums two integers. So I'll just say sum. So it takes an a, which is an int, and a b, which is an int. And so if it takes two parameters and I want to actually make an addition, I want to sum them, I would say the total is a plus b, right? And if I call this sum a, which would be, let's say 5 and 2, which should be 7. And if I run this, what will happen? Nothing actually happens, right? Because even though we're calling it, this is kind of where the result is stored, but we don't see it because we're not doing anything with this variable. It's not being accessed anywhere. So how do we get this as an output? We actually return this. So I'll say return total. And I can even make this simpler by just returning it right away. So I don't need to save it as I can just say return a plus b. So if I run this now, let's see what happens. You'll see that nothing is happening. It's still not happening anything, or we don't see anything. And the reason is that, so it's returning something, which means that this function is now returning an int. And you see this as well. You see the arrow and it returns an int. So the compiler, or it basically understands that this will return an int. So I can say this as well. I think I can say int like that, just to make it clear that this actually returns an int. But the important thing here is I have to actually store this, right, to a variable. So I'll say total. It will store the value of this, and then I can print the total, right? So let's see what happens now. I should see 7. Yes, and I see 7. So we see that I stored it as a variable. I don't need to store it either. I can just say print, you know. The important thing is that somehow the return value from this function is then received in the other end. In this case, it's being received by the print function, or it's being passed. So the return value from this function is being passed to this function, if that makes sense. Hopefully it does. There are some other things to talk about regarding functions. One thing is that you can do something called recursion. I won't go into the details of what that means. Recursion basically means that you can call the same function within itself. So it's a function that calls itself. And that's quite useful for many use cases. So many algorithms that you would solve would be elegantly solved using recursion. And you can do really complex things with recursion, like searching through nested structures like a list, or like a tree, for example. You can do things like traversing through a tree with recursion. So I won't go into those examples now. I think that is kind of a more advanced topic. I will probably make some other video about that, but for now, what you need to know is the basics now. So just remember that a function can take an input and return an output, and it can be used with multiple things. So I can say print sum 10, 10. So you see that I'm kind of reusing the logic of adding this, and this is now a simple logic, but it could be complex logic as well, right? And then you would kind of see the power of using functions. So functions, I would say, are a core feature in programming that you would have to understand quite well. Thanks for watching.